Hello, everybody. Welcome to Roundup for the 17th of January 2024. And this is a container that we hold every week in the Broom to talk about things which have been coming up in the Broom as a Discord server over the past week or so. And this is the first time we're trying it at a new time, which is quite early in the morning in Perth, Australia, and late at night in most of the USA, or on the eastern side of the USA. And yeah, I guess I'd love to check in and hear from y'all how you're doing, what's been coming up for you in the Broom this week. I'm gonna check the chat. I feel like yesterday, since I'm in Australia now, it's very difficult for me to join the weekly field tuning containers live, just based on the time. So I listened to it yesterday, and I felt like y'all were like spitting some pretty nuanced tea on the topic of romantic relationship, or I want to say like my interpretation was getting needs met within relationships, whether they're romantic or not. I pulled out a bunch of like juicy quotes, which I'm hoping at some point to take to social media in order to promote the container and the recording of the container. But yeah, I'd love to hear like how the prognosis for the week is sort of sitting with y'all so far, how it's showing up for you. If anybody wants to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I'll chime in a little bit. Hey, everyone. Yes, yesterday's container was kind of huge. And not just from the sense of like facilitating it. I think I even said it a couple of times in field tuning where I was like, am I going to say this? To indicate, I think, going faster, like touching topics that I don't usually touch. And I feel like when I pulled the cards and I saw that the Lovers was the first card, I was like, okay, here we go. And then Justice was the second card, and I was like, oh, damn, like, we're here. Like, we don't even have to go wherever we thought we had to go. And I guess, yeah. Sorry.
Were you going to say something, Julie?
Oh, no, I was just, like, groaning and, like, as like laughing at the same time. At that.
That's powerful. It's like I was laughing and chundering at the same time.
Right,
Yeah.
it's a combination of the two.
Yeah, there's many ways to combine those emotions, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think like what struck me like as soon as the container started was that it felt like it was very relevant to the window of time that the divination is for, but also it felt like the stuff that was coming through is like pretty timeless, which is an interesting thing to say as like a Taoist practitioner, because you know like the whole idea is that anything that can be articulated is not timeless, like it's not eternal.
Right.
But like, how can I justify saying it's timeless? I mean, I felt like a lot of the dynamics that were being highlighted kind of speak to that wisdom, right? Like, I think that like a lot of what you were saying, at least how it landed for me, was that in many ways we treat our approach to like romantic relationship as a collective, as if it is timeless when it actually isn't. Does that
Mm,
make sense?
it does. It does.
So it was almost like for me, at least a lot of it, dismembering the egregore around
Ooh,
romantic relationship.
that's good. I mean, that's what I want to happen. But I also feel like, thank you for reflecting that, because I'm like, there was a part of it where I felt hesitant to speak to, especially the bit about like tending to a relational container before it's like, before it
Mm.
materializes, was like really like not just powerful for me to say, because I was like writing some of this stuff down, right? So it's like when I was like saying it and reading this off, I'm like, gosh, like this could kind of open the door for a lot of different things. But I also feel like it takes that approach to match the like poignancy and like the resistance of the current time, like just the way that people understand romance in current time. I'm like, yeah, I feel like I kind of had to hack at it a little bit, respectively. So yeah, it was fun.
Hmm. Hmm. I feel like something that's kind of coming through about like what you meant about, well, I guess maybe it's a question about what you meant by like tending to relational containers
Hmm.
before relationships begin, let's say, in the material realm. Um, yeah, like is there anything like, are you saying like that maybe these relational containers open up before you even meet these people, or does this also
Yeah,
kind of relate to, yeah, like predominantly you'd say?
yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think like something else kind of coming up for me, and maybe this is just because I finished watching The Bear this week, is just like um how it's very difficult, I think, to time like the, I guess like the ingress of when like relationships become like explicitly romantic.
Mhm,
And I don't want to like ruin anything about The Bear because I know you haven't seen it yet. But I feel like, for example, like in certain cultures, I would say that like people get together in order to, like it's pretty much like defined from the get go whether a man and a woman or a woman and a woman or people of different
mhm,
orientations are meeting with like romantic intent. Whereas I'd say like in other cultures and other times, people um I think like you spoke to this in the container itself, like kind of just meet and then sort of play things out.
mhm, mhm,
But then when like romantic intent becomes kind of apparent or arises in the container of their relations, it can create like quite a bit of rupture because perhaps like
mhm,
that intent was asymmetrical, or perhaps there was an attachment to the relationship being of a certain non-romantic orientation. And yeah, that's something that I've been kind of meditating on. It's just how um like we have to choose timelines, and those timelines have consequences in the way that we're relating.
right.
um, However, also I don't necessarily feel like those like changes in like the temperature of a relationship necessarily have to be fatal
Mm.
or rupturous. And I guess I'm curious if there's anything coming through from you or from like y'all about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to hear from other folks too. I'll hold a little bit of space because, yeah, there is a bit coming through for me.
Yeah, something about like what we were talking about, what you said before I started talking again, really lit up my channel because I almost like got wiped the fuck out. I'll say that it's not uncommon for me when talking about, I think I'll say like things which are subversive to the egregore of romantic monogamy,
Mm-hmm.
it's not uncommon for me to feel like, yeah, I'll just say like psychically attacked or feel like there are forces which are trying to psychically attack me. And I guess like maybe I'll hold space for anybody else's experience around that too. It's like field tuning part B or something right now.
Yeah, it feels
I'm
like
not
an
mad about
extension.
it.
No, these are like the field notes from field tuning. Yeah. And I feel the same. Like, I think at one point during the container, I had to like get up and like walk around because I just could feel like just the way that the energy was like set up, that things were moving, even for me. And I'm like, oh gosh, like it was difficult. So I'm like, I'm glad that we're building it out, but I also feel like, yeah, my experience is very similar, and I don't want to project and be like, I'm sure it is for other people. I'm like actually genuinely curious, and I want to know, like, yeah, what it's like for y'all when you try to even like step out of the confines of the modern day romance egregore.
Mm, I mean, I guess I'm kind of like tuning in and trying to see whether it makes sense to talk a little bit about what psychic attacks mean, like within sort of the
Mhm.
container of the broom, because I feel like we talk about it quite a lot in
Yeah.
the broom, and I'd say like even in like circles of spiritual practitioners, I'm not really sure like if there is a common definition or if people know what that means or if they think it's even like a real thing.
Hmm.
Um, so first I'm going to read out. I mean, Ahmed was saying that the first season of The Bear raised your blood pressure. I hope your blood pressure is back to normal. I definitely considered watching that show as, I wouldn't say like a spiritual initiation, but it was definitely a spiritual practice for me. Um, yeah, does anybody have anything to say about like how they define psychic attacks? I don't want to turn this into an episode of Why Am I Like This, definitely in terms of like the amount of time I speak for. But I also feel like I definitely could if no one cuts me off.
I wouldn't be mad about it. I wouldn't be mad about it.
Well, I mean, I guess like as somebody who's been psychically attacked and talked about it quite publicly and like run into like certain experiences with like fairly prominent people, I want to say that yeah, I guess like for me, what happens when one is being psychically attacked is usually like somebody's like expanding in some way, right? So I can definitely imagine how um like when you opened up to receive the transmission on like the lovers and the justice archetypes which came up in field tuning, that there was sort of like a glow up which occurred because of that. And then I'd say that like when we are running more crystalline awareness like through our bodies, that like it creates, you could say, not, it creates like sound, like a louder sound in the field if you want to talk about vibration through the lens of sound, or it kind of like leaves more marks in different realms because like most of us, like we're not, I'd say like none of us, like as long as we're any human form, we're still leaking energy in some ways, right?
Hmm.
Like, our forms are themselves karmic from the perspectives of like less karmic realms, you could say. And so all that abundance of energy and that increased supply of interconnected awareness is being pushed through a matrix, like a body which has holes in it, and then that's like leaking like sparks of energy in these realms, and those sparks of energy have the information that is encoded in our awareness from my perspective, so that if we're like channeling stuff around dismembering romantic monogamy, my words, or yeah, like injustice within romantic relationships, then I'd say like thought form complexes which are kind of tuned into the frequencies of those concepts or attached to the frequencies of those concepts are going to get alerted, and they're going to kind of come for that energy. And then yeah, like what that might feel like in someone's vessel is um like mosquitoes, you know, like when you're sleeping and like a mosquito gets into your room and it's like like it's like for me it's kind of like that, like
Totally.
psychically. It can sort of, even I'd say, like if I'm well shielded, it kind of just feels like there's something outside
Mm.
well fortified perimeter. But if I'm not well shielded, then like I might feel like I'm experiencing intrusive thoughts, or like thoughts which are like unfamiliar to me. Yeah, and I guess like yeah, it's probably, I would say that just before I ask y'all like how that lands for you is like I said, usually that means that like my energy is leaking out through my attachments to some thought form complexes or demons or behavioral patterns. And I would say that whether I'm shielded or I'm shielding these things out, or whether like they're getting in and activating these thought form complexes, and that's manifesting as tension in my body or numbness in my body or intrusive thinking, I kind of feel like I'm called often to use it as an opportunity to find karma that can be released in my body. And then when I release that, then I glow up even more. And sometimes like that can lead to a semi-extended period of dealing with yeah, like what we call psychic attacks. But yeah, I'm kind of curious how that feels for y'all. Lexi says that aligns for me. Potter's got 3 100s there. I mean, I feel like the term itself is like psychic attacks is so loaded. I don't know
It
if that's
is.
the same way for y'all. Like
Yeah.
sometimes when other people use it, I'm like, is it really a psychic attack? I don't, I kind of like discern in my own body. But I also wonder if like a lot of the time, if there are better terms that we might use.
Yeah, I'd say I think about that too. Like, what are some other ways to like look at psychic attacks? But you also said intrusive thoughts, which really aligns for me because and like the feeling of also something outside of me trying to get in. Not like, oh, like, but it'll be like I'm doing something and I can feel something trying to pull my attention elsewhere. And I'm
So,
like, yeah, it might not feel like an attack, like, in the physical way that we're, like, used to, like, attacks, like, on a material, like, basis, but I'm like, it's definitely feels like something about, like, my awareness, at least personally, can, like, feel shrunken, and it's, like, something, yeah, like, just outside of my usual set of, like, vibes. I'm like, "This is not my vibe." So, yeah, that's definitely what it feels like for me.
I'm gonna read out what Julie said. Um, I'll say for me, psychic attacks can manifest as bodily sensations and or emotional degradation. I really like that term. Like bouts of random anxiousness and disoriented thinking. And like it's out of nowhere. Lexi says, I feel my awareness sometimes swimming between the thought form / demons as a way to dodge them. I feel like I got that from Spa, Ninja Emoji. And then I can more easily dismember them. Yeah, I mean, if you're not aware, Spa is a lineage which is being transmitted out of the 000 lineage space, which is one of the lineage spaces in the broom. Which I don't think we've necessarily talked about lineage spaces for a while, but I won't go down that alleyway right now. But it's really good to hear that some of the stuff that you're learning in Spa is helping you navigate. I'm going to say like psychic interference instead of psychic attacks. I'm just going to take that for a spin. I feel like it's kind of more relatable, and for some reason it feels like it builds bridges towards some of the terminology that other people use. And I also feel like it's
Question on that.
maybe. Sorry, what was that?
I was gonna ask you a question on that. Like when you were describing what it means, I was thinking of like the term like psychic dissipation because it's all about how your energy seeps away, right? And so when I
Mm,
think of an attack, the main thing of an attack versus dissipation is like, the active or passive influence of whatever is, the thought form complexes that are removing your energy. Whereas I think like an attack, means or denotes that there is an active aggressor who's actually put that in place.
Mhm.
So is that
that's what.
what you see here as well, or is it just a dissipation? It's just how that thought form, engages you and
Mm.
takes away from your energy, as opposed to not necessarily having the intent of doing that, or someone taking the intent to do that.
Yeah, I really like that you brought that parameter into it because I think, I mean, I would say that it's if I wonder if you think of thought form complexes or like demons um as like sentient. I guess I would like ask that question first before I go further.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to consider anything as sentient, to be honest. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We're in the broom. Yeah. I mean, I would say that on the part of like thought form complexes or demons, then there is like an intent, and then like to take it to like what you said about like an aggressor. I mean, I kind of think of them as like psychofauna. Like I think that term is sort of like coming up as something which is kind of new and fresh and like not necessarily like too distorted yet, but I think like it creates space to think of demons as not necessarily evil, but just aggressive in a non-evil way. I mean, I think that also creates space for us to think of ourselves, let's say, like under the influence of psychofauna, or psychofauna, as not necessarily being evil, but being unconscious, or just having intentions and like directionality which is in conflict with like the directionality of other sentient beings, right? So I think like on the part of the psychofauna itself, I would say that there is a form of aggression there, and the reason like I tend to say that is because thought form complexes cannot exist without the attention of life forms. So like I tend to differentiate between thought forms and life forms. Um, whereas life forms generate awareness through the mechanical functioning of their bodies, which um, sort of participate and also sustain the orchestration of energy that we tend to call spirit. Thought form complexes don't have bodies, so they don't generate that intelligence, and they only survive because they're able to attach to or relate to spirit, based on like attaching to disorganized awareness, um, which I'd say like ends up being kicked up when people or life forms are dysregulated, um, or I would say in ideal circumstances like collaborating um, non-coercively with life forms. Let's say like perhaps like a good example would be like language. Like I would call language a very rich set of thought forms or psychofauna, which collaborate with life forms under a lot of circumstances for mutual benefit. And then, I guess like again, like just returning to the question of whether, like perhaps the term psychic attacks feels so charged because it sort of implies that there is an aggressor there. Um, Again, like thought forms, psychofauna, definitely aggressive in a lot of circumstances. But then I would say that the people that they influence, or the other life forms that they influence into acts of aggression, um, I don't think that. I mean, often it's a lack of what people might call intent, or the lack of an energetic posture, of rootedness or centeredness, which allows people to, you could say, unconsciously or in a state of dysregulation, give their awareness to psychofauna, which ends up powering them up so that they can attack people. Let's say, for example, while they're transmitting on romantic monogamy. I just wanted to bring it back to like the very specific example because I feel like we kind of spiraled out. And then I think like maybe like something which comes up is like, why would psychofauna try to attack someone while they're transmitting something on the topic of romantic monogamy and injustice in monogamous relationships? And it's like, I mean, because we just talked about like dismembering some of these egregores, right? Like these egregores. Egregores, like for me, is another term for psychofauna or for thought form complexes or for demons. So, like just like humans and just like other life forms do, it's like when our bodies get attacked, then we often team up to defend against those attacks. And sometimes defense looks like preemptive attack. So, sometimes I won't even be transmitting on the topic yet, and I'll feel like I'm getting psychically attacked, and I'm like, psychically interfered with. And then later on, when I'm actually transmitting, I'll come into the gnosis that I was being interfered with because they were trying to stop me from transmitting on a certain topic. But hopefully that makes sense for you. But I guess I'm to bring it back to field tuning and the lovers and the justice cards. I'm kind of curious. Like if there are aspects of that experience of being psychically interfered with, that sort of shed light on, I want to say, like connections between demons in the unseen for you, Hoda, or if anything's coming through for anybody.
Can you repeat the last part of that question?
Yeah. I mean, if anything's coming through for anybody about like what the interference related to, or like anything specific about like what was being defensive.
Okay. I'm gonna hold a little bit of space because I feel like I had a pretty strong notion, because similar to what you said, like after I like transmit or like walk through the gates of the transmission, if you will, it'll like come up and I'm like, oh, I can see those geometries. I can see even like what parts of my ancestry. I can see which parts of my body were like resistant and were like attached to like you said, like different programs and different programs that benefit, I think, from that disembodied state that some of us can get in. And I was just like, oh, okay, like this, not only then, but even now, I'm like that. It makes a lot of sense, but I want to hold space and see if anyone has any idea of like what would try to stop something, something like that.
I mean, Ahmed says, I find the idea that you brought up how fellow egregores interact in the attack fascinating. And I think that definitely feels like a key to like what I feel like I'm holding space for. And it talks about the dynamic of Pluto and Capricorn, which, I mean, I think like there are definitely egregores there, but I feel like in this case, like the egregore of like the tropical zodiac and the egregore, let's say, of Pluto, which is not necessarily overly inaccurate, especially given that we talked about it in Roundup last week.
That part.
Almost like hold a portal for this kind of dismemberment to occur. Because I guess like it's also worth saying, maybe this like connects a little bit with what Ahmed was saying, which is that like egregores can interact collaboratively and they can also be in conflict with one another, right? Just like animals in nature, because they are still competing for the resources of our awareness, which is actually not something I've thought of before. So I'm really glad that y'all said those two things in sequence. Julie say I'm sitting here thinking about the why for interference when something not wanting a certain form to be said or materialized. Like, oh, I'd love to go deeper on that. Ahmed, I think, is going down similar path. Is it the associations we have to the original subject at hand? Makes sense if so, but a lot more fascinating if it's not our own associations that gang up. Boom. Potter says neural networks, anyone? Uh-huh. Um, yes. Do thought forms want to persist intentionally? Wow, so many questions. So many great questions. I mean, like in certain lineages, they talk about healing demons or giving release to demons, and I would say, like, on some level, all demons want to die. Like, I mean, I think this like relates to the concept of the demiurge, because I think that all thought forms ultimately relate to the demiurge, which is, I would say, like an urge to not exist because, I'd say, like, at least in our density of perception, or like in the densities of perception which give rise to our matrix, separation is basically like encoded into the way our matrix works. And I would say like separation is like a major key towards why like the demiurge relates to like not wanting to exist, because existing in separation is painful. um and I think that relates very much to romantic monogamy and perhaps like some of the collaborations between egregores which were psychically interfering. um And then, yeah, like to go back to like the wife interference, or is it the associations? I think it definitely is the associations we have with the original subject as the people who are being psychically interfered with, because as Hoda says, like, like the neural network gets lit up by those associations and that calls in different egregores. And I'd say, like, for the most part, those egregores, given that they are associated in our local physical neural networks, they're probably collaborating, which I think is also why, like we kind of talk a lot of shit about egregores around meditation and like ideas that meditation has to look a certain way, but I feel like being able to hold awareness without necessarily giving it in the form of attention to like cycling thoughts is part of so many lineages, because it prevents the invocation of associated thought forms in our neural networks when we are experiencing psychic interference, right? So if we start being psychically interfered with by our connection to a certain thought form, and then all those associations light up and like awareness is just cycling around our brains, then it's almost like you're cold, like it's like, like you're running around the battlefield like beating a pan, like asking to be interfered with. But I think like when we can hold on to awareness in our bodies and not have it rush up to our heads to power up all of those thought forms, which, create that energetic dissipation, which invites more psychic interference, then we can kind of stay, I want to say, like our head above water in some ways. But yeah, I'd say like for me, at least the way I kind of think about it, is yes, like these associations don't only need to be ours, but I think they can exist like outside of our bodies, often in the bodies of other people. So say like if we start speaking while we're being psychically interfered with, and then somebody else receives that, and then that activates their thought form complexes in a dysregulated way, then the associations which exist locally in their neural networks can also get flared up, and then attacks, you could say, can come through them. And I think a lot of people have probably experienced this. I think it relates to the topic of hermetic technology, which is something that's come up in not just in Roundup, but in the Broom in general, which I think relates to just, being really discerning about who we are in the vicinity of when we're doing intense spiritual practice. Which I think also relates to the topic of romantic monogamy, because like a lot of the relationships we end up in as spiritual practitioners, I think, expose us to a lot of this kind of polarity, and therefore this kind of psychic interference coming through the vessels of people that we're intensely connected to. But then, yeah, I'd say that it also happens when we're not around other people. And yeah, I'd say that thought forms can collaborate outside of the neural networks of humans, certainly outside of the neural networks of life forms, or you could say like inside the neural networks of the vaster life forms that we exist within, right? I think we're covering a lot of like really like spicy fringe metaphysical frameworks
Yeah.
content, right? But like I've said before, I think many different lineages sort of allude to what for me is a fact, which is that like our reality takes place within a vaster body, which has a body which is much like ours, right? So like I think this relates to like the Hermetic axiom that um as above, so below, as within, so without, or things which are at our level are alike to things which are at more dense levels and at more vast levels. So like if we have neural networks and like we have internal universes, then you could say that like the universe that we are in is internal and connected to neural networks of a body that we're all part of. And I'd say that that's probably the primary mechanism by which there is thought form collaboration outside of the bodies of life forms at our density of perception. And I would say that, for me, what appear to be timelines or possibility planes, or you could say like, timelines for me are like ways of mapping out choice planes, and then possibility planes are basically all different densities of the unfolding slash like the linearization of time within the body that our universe takes place in. And just like in our bodies, when there is some sort of like tension or numbness, that's usually a sign that there is like a disorganization of energy, or you could say like meshed timelines, let's say, based on unclear choices. That tends to kick up awareness in the form of attention, which activates egregores, thought forms. I'd say the same thing happens in the bodies of which that we're a part, right? So if timelines start to be given awareness in the vaster bodies that we're a part of, that can map at our level to some sort of anticipation on the level of the thought forms in the vaster body that we're a part of, that our awareness is going to walk certain timelines. Like we're going to make choices which threaten, I'm going to say, like the food source for these thought form complexes, which is like the attention of us and other life forms. And then they sort of preemptively get defensively activated in the bodies of, like I'll say, like what people call the one, which I don't think is actually necessarily the one, but maybe the one from the perception of our bodies. And that tends to lead to what we might call psychic interference at our level, at the human level, let's say. But yeah, I think like to connect it back to the question about like why there might have been psychic interference around a transmission relating to mismembering romantic monogamy, I'd say it's because, and I think you spoke to this, and other people in the container of field tuning this week spoke to this too. It's just like, like we give a lot of our attention away, I feel, to egregores relating to romantic monogamy, whether that's like when we're not in relationship or when we're just like dating and we're not necessarily in like well-defined relationships yet. I would say like we even give attention to egregores around romance in general when we're explicitly not monogamous, or we're non-explicitly non-monogamous. And for me, at least like intuitively, or you could say like gnostically, it's pretty clear how depriving certain egregores of that, what some lineages call louche, or like dysregulated awareness or attention, might invite psychic interference.
I feel like so much of that tracks for me. I just wanna, yeah. Um, dang.
But like having I mean, I think like having like listened to that transmission, and also, I'd say like having put that transmission into the ether of like collective human consciousness. Um, I'm kind of curious, like if anything's coming up in terms of like how you see people or yourselves like moving differently with regard to romance and monogamy, as a result of that transmission.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on some level, that's like a really big question. But on another level, I'm like, well, yeah, I do feel and hope to like capture almost like or create a portal where if people are going to be thinking about romance and dating and partnership anyway, they can do so on their own terms. Is kind of like
Hmm.
the simplest way that I can put it, because I'm like, if there's all this awareness and all these beings and entities benefiting, which I kind of like, well, not kind of, I actually subscribe to a lot. It's a huge part of my practice, but I'm like, if there are these like schools of thought that benefit from maintaining awareness in a particular way, my hope is like in field tuning to like attune people to like a baseline question or like a baseline space in their body where connection with another person can start to become and it's so funny because like before field tuning I was having like a handful of conversations and so many people were just sharing their like perspectives about romance, where they are, what they want, and I just was like, damn, this is good fucking research, because it just felt so relevant, because it almost feels like collectively there's this interest and there's this predilection towards romance, but almost like a recoiling at the same time. And my hope is like, yeah, like field tuning can kind of create space between that recoil or that dysregulation so that maybe the thing that speaks to people's romantic narrative or like the thing that they seek in partnership can occur to them more clearly, as opposed to that space being, I would say, like colonized by, yeah, like thought forms that don't align with like oftentimes like the where they are at developmentally, but I won't get into that. um but yeah, I do feel like I agree with what you said, like why so many lineages kind of have this um, exorcism as a central part of their like practice, is because I actually believe that like there there are so many like processes that exist in the like the human ecosystem that kind of are fortified by relationships, and like it kind of is mirrored by the way that we live, and like it kind of explains our yearnings. But if there's a gap between what people desire and what they actually seek, like their vision becomes kind of like blurry to it, just to kind of like put a metaphor to it, then I think their direction becomes skewed and almost dictated by those thought forms, as opposed to just, I would say, like having an interest in someone and like pursuing that interest, whether or not it's romantic. That tells a story, and that whatever that pursuit or that reception, let's say, depending on how you rock when you're like courting other people, I think it I think it yeah, I think it kind of tells a story that's more true to the body, that's more true to the spirit. And whereas thought forms, I just don't think they accomplish that personally.
Oh shit. I love how like I dangled this question where like you might, or anybody might, just like talk about concrete new ways of being with regard to, I want to say, like getting needs met or being in loving relation with other beings. But you kind of like went like a really, what for me is like apophatic or Taoish way, right? Which is to like talk about what it's not gonna be and
Mm.
hold space for what it can be in each different context with each different person. in each different space and time.
Yes.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm called also to like hold that space, and yeah, maybe like some of y'all can feel it as space and not necessarily as a form of stalling. Just gonna hold space and see if there's anything in chat. I feel like I'm purging a lot of thought forms relating to how it might look to not have like awareness constrained in those sorts of contexts by the colonization of these thought forms. And I'll say, like, to be real, like some of what's coming up for me is I think it relates to something that people might call like anxiety or fear, right? Because I don't think I've necessarily often felt this way, but right now I'm kind of feeling the ways in which these thought forms, even when they're not satisfying to people based on what they might need at any given time, like misery can be a form of comfort in relation to the unknown, especially for people or for vessels or for lineages which perhaps haven't felt uncertainty be like a joyful thing for a very long time. There's a lot of space there to project things which are even worse than misery. I'd say a lot of that's kind of coming up in my body. As I want to say, like, maybe we start to wrap up this little mini container on unpacking. Oh, I love what you said about field notes for field tuning. Especially for this container, because I think it was huge, and I listened to it over the course of like 2 or 3 hours while walking a lot.
That's sure.
But yeah, does anybody have anything else to say about, I guess, this container of topics? I mean, I guess like before we kind of wrap up this container and roundup, I feel like called to talk about the Broom Radio on social media and just like building out that presence. I think like the Broom, formerly known as the Breathing Room, has gone through many changes throughout the 2 or 3 years it's really been a thing. And recently we've sort of rebranded aspects of the Broom such that the Broom, I'd say, we have the Broom Radio. I would say like the Broom is really moving and like solidifying as like the external face of like what we're calling the pot, which is, I'm going to say, like the members area for the Broom, where a lot of people who've been in the Broom for a long time, I think I want to say like make offerings to the pot, which ends up creating offerings which go outside of the Broom via the Broom Radio, and I think increasingly via like the Broom Radio social media properties, so that the things that we're cooking up in the pot have more ways to interact with people on parasocial media. And I'd say like, yeah, it's a particular like geometry, I would say, which allows those in the pot to conduct or participate in what we call like spiritual warfare, or what Ahmed related to as described as mimetic warfare. Mimetic warfare, not memetic warfare, even though I think like the closeness of those sounds is pretty spicy. But yeah, I mean, like with a concrete example, I would say like bringing through this transmission and field tuning and then putting it onto the Spotify podcast and the YouTube I don't know if people call it podcast, but like a channel, so that people can interact with it materially speaking outside the broom is a good example of that, right? Where like these codes which you're bringing through, which I think probably relates. I mean, I think you commented in the container itself, like how much synchronicity there is between the different containers that we're putting out in the broom radio, say between archetypal hour, why am I like this, T sometimes, even though we don't put that out very often because it's just mostly me and sometimes other people babbling with me. But then also with like field tuning and shouting away, there is like a remarkable amount of like synchronicity, but then also just like conversations within the broom. Like last week we talked about scorpionic and plutonic energy because we have a bunch of plutonic scorpionic people in the broom because, or in the pot you could say, because what we're doing in the pot I think relates to plutonic themes of just, I want to say like with increasing gracefulness, allowing like the matrix of the human collective consciousness to lovingly and gently release things which hold it individually and collectively within karmic loops of extraction and suffering. And yeah, ultimately, like feeding thought forms in the body of the one. And I think like this connects for me directly to like narratives around like liberating ourselves individually and collectively from yeah, these loops. But it says metaphysical plumbers reporting for duty or duty. Would you say like you're more like metaphysical Mario or metaphysical Luigi?
Totally Luigi.
You're on like, or like, where are you on the like Mario Luigi spectrum? It's like all
I
the way
w-
Luigi.
no, I would probably say like 30% Mario, 70% Luigi. What about you?
I'm like, I feel like right now I feel like 55% Mario, 45% Luigi. Does anybody
Yeah.
else want to chime in with like Mario Luigi divination? Like, what's your Mario Luigi personality type right now?
Drop it in the chat, please.
I don't even know the differences. Well, I'm 55% Mario right now, and Hoda's 70% Luigi. So that's the difference.
Yeah.
What can you infer from that? Nah, I mean, like Luigi, he wears green and blue overalls. Mario wears red and blue overalls. Mario is like the older of the Mario brothers. Um, Ahmed says one guy's chasing a princess, the other is the cousin. I think they're brothers, right?
Yeah.
The other is the cousin that occasionally helps out. I mean, family structures can be difficult, but um, I'm 55% chasing a princess, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe slightly less after the field tuning. Yeah, as y'all are like using your bodies as pendulums or muscle testing or using other oracular devices to chime in with your Mario Luigi personality types. I guess, yeah, I'll say, yeah, I'm really looking forward to building out those social media properties, putting out different forms of content relating to the containers that we hold in the Broom Radio. Spreading awareness and like getting some of these codes that we bring in through the pot of the broom into, yeah, like material parasocial media. I mean, I think something I said this week is that like part of the spiritual war, I think, is like harnessing distracted behavior which leads people to like conducting more of their lives on parasocial media so that we can like open doors to, I want to say, like more conscious modes of being, whether it's on parasocial media or not. I don't know if anybody has questions about what I mean when I say parasocial media, but hopefully not, because we only have a couple of minutes. Julie's 35-65 Luigi Mario. Wow, you flipped it. So like you're even more Mario than me right now. But you flipped it. So like there's obviously different dimensions to this framework of personality divination. Well, this says I'm on the floor, and I kind of saw like Mario because I'm 55% Mario right now, kind of like doing. Is it called like the funky chicken when you get on the floor and like you go around in circles? That's kind of what I was doing.
Yeah, that tracks. Maybe next
I
time we can
mean,
play with the rest of what is the rest of the characters, like Bowser, the
the
princess.
Pantheon.
Yeah, like the Pantheon. Maybe we can bring that in next time so there's like more options for
Yeah.
people.
Would you say like Bowser and Princess are like polarities?
Yeah,
I mean,
actually.
they're all kind of polarities. Like I can imagine there being a Mario Princess spectrum. A Bowser Princess spectrum feels like really ripe though. So yeah,
Yeah.
like think about where you are on the Mario Luigi spectrum. Think about where you are on the Bowser Princess spectrum. Please join us in the Broom Discord, and like I don't think many people like responded about whether they thought the emoji were racist for the moon. But if you want to chime in with your Mario Luigi Bowser Princess personality types, I'd love to hold space for that. And yeah, like Hoda says, let's play with some geometries in romantic relationship and in relationship in general. And in the Nintendo universe or the Sega universe or the PlayStation universe or the Marvel universe. And yeah, I mean, we're getting up into like tea time. So if no one has anything else to say, I'm going to disinvite Craig from our container with love. And
Bye,
thank you for
Craig.
joining us for the roundup January 17th, 2024 episode. And hopefully we'll see you in the broom. Peace.